Prison is a normal New Testament experience. And when you're told you have to leave, maybe we need to tell the authorities, I understand your position, but actually someone higher has told me to stay. You'll say, well, if you stay, you're going to have to go to jail. And we need to say, you can put me in jail, but I feel it's only right to remind you that in at least one case, the jail was knocked down by God for putting his servants there. Do you want to take responsibility for that?
Greg, you had a very tough and dysfunctional childhood, and we want to know your journey from there to your encounter in a movie theater with Jesus.
Like all of you, we have had the privilege of being chosen. We didn't choose ourselves, did we?
No.
And I just daily thank God that he rescued me from a pretty rotten childhood. My father was Jewish, actually, but never acknowledged me and was killed in World War II. My mother put me in 5 foster homes, and I was very bitter until I got lured into a movie theater on a Sunday morning that was actually the Baptist church meeting, and heard the gospel at 16 for the first time. And then her family nurtured me into the walk with the Savior. But I was pretty much still wanting to be somebody in the world, to be a lawyer, tired of being poor. And I was going to go to Princeton, but my foster sister said, you ought to go to Wheaton College where there's 1,000 Christian girls. And I felt strangely led. But there I was invited to an all-night prayer meeting by George Brewer.
First, you ever tell us what happened in the movie theater? Your first encounter with Jesus.
Yeah, thank you for guiding me through this, Uncle. The cowboy preacher, who was barely literate, just told us that God had visited the earth. And I thought, that's cool. That's space travel. And then that God died. And I thought, no, I don't think you can kill God. I think the bullets would bounce off his chest. Then he rammed home that God died for me. And I just was stunned. Nobody's done anything for me. How could the head honcho of the universe have done anything? But I just had to find out what news that was, that the Creator even knew I existed, much less did such a thing. And so I was very quickly discovering the Lord, but my ambitions for the Lord didn't come until at Wheaton College. I was invited to an all-night prayer meeting. Some of you might know that story. I said to my fellow student, what have you got to pray about that takes all night? And he said, the Muslim world. In 1959, we'd never seen a Muslim. They weren't in the papers. They weren't troubling anybody that we knew of. I thought a Muslim was some kind of tablecloth or something, Muslim. And out of jealousy, pride, I decided I could pray as long as he could. So I went down to Moody Bible Institute, walked in the room where George Brewer was leading this all-night prayer meeting. And I had gone to meet some girls and get some nice treats, but there were no girls there.
Donuts.
Just guys on the floor praying over maps. And I went up to George Brewer to shake his hand, thinking he'd be glad I was there. And he didn't shake my hand, but he stuck his finger in my chest. And he said, what country are you claiming, brother? Wow, I wasn't even claiming my tuition, never mind a country. But I didn't want him to know that. So I said, what's left? And he said, Libya. You got Libya. And I thought, Libya, that must be one of those islands off Florida. That's how ignorant I was of the world. But I did want to obey the Lord. And so I crawled into this little circle of guys on their knees on the floor. And they showed me where Libya was. And I made an honest prayer. Lord, send people to these people in Libya. And that night, it was an all-night prayer meeting. God really met me and said, I'm inviting you to be my servant among the Muslim peoples. And I was scared. not of the Muslims, but scared that I would have to marry some lady who had her hair up in a bun with a doily on the top, and that
You'll be wearing a pith hat or something.
my caricature of missionaries was terrible. But then I remembered this little redhead who I'd met the year before, who was studying to be a doctor, who knew her call was to Egypt or Pakistan with the Presbyterians. So I found her in the library and proposed to her immediately, which she just turned around and ignored me. But she's now stayed with me 60 years, Sally. From there, we kept going down to Mexico to distribute Bibles. And then George Brewer sent me a little note and said, I want you to charter a plane and bring over a plane full of North Americans to join 900 European youth to go to every village in Austria, Belgium, France, Italy, and Spain, offering the New Testament and at least a Bible correspondence course. And so I went down to the travel agency. Remember now, I'm old. I'm 22 years old. And I said, I'd like to charter a plane. And I said, how much would that be? And he did some calls and found out it was something like $23,000 at the time, maybe more. And I said, no, I don't want to buy the plane. I just want to use it once. And so he gave me a schedule. Okay, you have to have this much money in by this time and this much money by that time and so forth.
You paid $15 deposit?
That's right. That's right. $15 deposit. And I said to my wife, go to my classes in my MA course. And I got a ticket on the Greyhound bus for 99 days for $99 and went to school after school in the day and slept in the buses at night and said, come with us to Europe to visit these 5 countries. And people said, how much does it cost? I said, it costs you your life. What do you mean, how much does it cost?
Yeah.
You got to put in everything you got. Some people put $40 in, some 2,000 or 3,000. But anyway, we got 103 people on that plane, and that was the beginning of stretching faith until after the summer in Spain. Now, remember, I'm feeling a call to the Arab world, to Libya. And George Brewer says, I want you to take a team of 14 to India. I said, India? I don't even know where India is. He said, keep driving east. You can't miss it. And so in 1963, 14 of us drove through the snow because we were caught into a sickness that delayed us 8 weeks. We were quarantined in Switzerland. And then I arrived January 1st, 1964 in Delhi with sandals, very thin trousers, because everybody knows India is really hot, right? I mean, like about, and of course it's freezing in New Delhi in January. And that's just an example of how we knew nothing. And we were so naive when the missionary said, what's your team going to do? We said, we're going to mobilize Indians so that they claim their country for Christ. And they all rolled their eyes because I had no idea how we were going to do that. I ended up being captured by a brother who took me under his wing and discipled me, particularly in faith believing prayer. And the OM story goes on from there. At one point, about 3,000 persons were in some form of ministry, but not that much to Muslims.
Where you left your son, Paul, in India as your legacy.
Yeah, he's quite renowned. He's actually studied under Ravi Shankar himself.
Oh,
And would have been part of Ravi Shankar's most intimate group, except that the other disciples objected to a Christian being in that group.
no.
But he was very close to Ravi Shankar and played at his funeral. So that's our investment today in India, that he's been called an Indian with a white skin, which I'm very proud of.
Okay. You left 3,000 OMers in India, but worldwide you have what? Something like 100,000?
I can't take much credit for that. I did some university recruiting at Oxford and Cambridge and some other places. So yeah, OM grew internationally wonderfully, but I can't take much credit for that. Basically, God's given me the desire to give people vision to live beyond their self evaluation and believe God to do something in their lives.
While you were recruiting in UK, in Oxford and Cambridge and all those places, they had to yell at it. You say, stop, got too many already.
God's been so kind to use a bumbling servant like me. I'm very aware that it's just a privilege and grace to get in on what God is doing.
So, Greg, you were with OM for a long time, and then you parted company with it. What happened while you were there? What made you depart from there?
It wasn't a disagreement. Brother George and I are very close to this day. We communicate almost every week.
Mm.
But OM was called to mainly be a literature distribution ministry. And I finally woke up that unless we leave house churches with their own elders, we're falling short of the Great Commission.
Yeah.
I asked George if I could take OM into Pakistan, and he said, we're overcommitted. And he started crying. I started crying because OM was my family. But I just really felt unless we leave behind house churches with their own elders, we're really stopping short of what God has in mind. I went back to the States and pastored my home church for 3 years until North Africa Mission asked me to come and be their North American director. So we recruited about 92 long-term people for Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. And then they asked me to stop. They said, we're full. I said, we're full? What do you mean we're full? Their particular training system didn't allow for the numbers that were coming. So they blessed us to go out and take Ralph Winter's invitation to go out to Pasadena, California, and the U.S. Center for World Mission. We went there not knowing exactly what we were going to do, but I walked on the beach nearby for 3 weeks to hear the Lord, and he put it on my heart to start a new mission that would go to Muslims only and church planting among Muslims and on teams, not individuals, but teams with the different giftings.
Yeah.
And I met this guy, Tim Lewis, who made all the difference in the world as we became a team. And the rest is history, I guess.
Greg, basically, OM was an evangelistic ministry. They sowed the seed, but you wanted the harvest. So, you wanted discipling, basically, discipling center, hubs. That was the essential difference. And of course, it had to be specific for Muslims. So,
Yeah, that was my calling because the Muslims were the most neglected peoples by far across the world.
Yeah.
And unless you focus on Muslims, you will very quickly stray to anybody that wants to hear the gospel. In Frontiers, we said, you stick with Muslims or we cut your hands off. Contextualization.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about the global picture of Muslims, where they are and where they are responding, where they are not responding, where they are hardcore, and whether you're getting good response.
God is doing definitely more than we've seen in our lifetime, but probably less than is being reported.
Yeah.
One of Satan's strategies is to give people the impression that tens of thousands of Muslims are coming to Christ, and therefore we can let up and let God get on with it. We need to love God with our mind and discern what is really out there. One brother reported that he went to Africa and said hundreds of thousands of Muslims are coming to Christ. And that was from maybe a 3-week visit. And so I keep asking the question, where are the fellowships? Paul had at least 30 churches with elders that he kept track of.
Yeah.
And so these stories aren't meaningful to me unless there's real evidence that it's going to be lasting fruit. House churches that reproduce, but it's certainly more than it's been in history.
You have 5 schemes of Satan defined about Muslim ministry. 5 schemes of Satan. One of them is that Satan insists Muslims are our enemies.
That's one.
And then second one, of course, you unpacked just now about exaggerated reports, people saying that. And the third one is about Satan tells a lie that Western missionaries are not needed for Muslim ministries. Yeah. And the fourth one you said is the dissension about methodologies. Use the Quran or not to use the Quran, and all kinds of methodologies are on the scatter all the time, and Christians are busy discussing methodologies instead of reaching the lost. And the fifth one is don't risk your family. Don't take your families because it's risky. Go it alone.
I think everybody on this call understands those 5 barriers. Satan isn't going to just look the other way. And to exaggerate how well it's going is not helpful. To be hopeless that it's not going to happen is also a lie from the wicked one. But the key, of course, is finding your faithful men or women who will teach others also. For example, my fruit in the air world can be wrapped up in 2 names, both of which I took under my wing when I lived in Lebanon. And they've gone on to do far more than I could imagine. And it's still all about 2 Timothy 2, and then just getting behind anointed servants who refuse to quit and to encourage them in every way we can through the battles, right?
Yeah. There are some countries like Iran and Algeria and Burma and what couple more countries where we're seeing a good response. We're seeing movements over there, isn't it?
Algeria is wonderful, but remember, sometimes we're just talking about one people group, the Kabyles, yeah. And that doesn't mean it's happening much among the Arabs.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that's why it's so important to think people groups, because there's nothing automatic about people going from their own people to the next door neighbors who maybe they have a history of hating. And so where there's a big movement, those people need to be pioneer missionaries to another tribe or group, as you all know, and they need a lot of encouragement to do that. For example, we're trying to get some of those Kabyles into southern Libya, where they have cousins who are also Kabyles, and that is just barely beginning to happen.
Yeah. There are movements going on in Bangladesh and Indonesia also.
That's 2 of the most fruitful places
Yeah.
by far. But then right next door in Malaysia, nothing. There's not really one even house church known of MBBs in Malaysia. Think of that. And it's a great place to live. If you want comfort in a nice place, go to the Malay in Malaysia. But you won't find even a house church with an elder there. It's a great burden. We were there 5 years trying to stir it up there. And the Christians, who are mainly Chinese and Indians, they just don't understand how that could be done. They say it's illegal. I try to remind people, look, Christianity's been illegal all over the world, all through history. So what's that got to do with it?
It's above nationalism. Kingdom is above nationalism. If you have to give up citizenship of a particular country to do your ministry in another country, you should be willing to do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And not just give up your nationalism, but prison is a normal New Testament experience. And when you're told you have to leave, maybe we need to tell the authorities, I understand your position, but actually someone higher has told me to stay. You'll say, well, if you stay, you're going to have to go to jail. And we need to say, you can put me in jail, but I feel it's only right to remind you that in at least one case, the jail was knocked down by God for putting his servants there. And do you want to take responsibility for that?
Burma has been responding, the Rohingyas have been responding in huge numbers.
I hadn't heard that. My wife's especially burdened for the Rohingyas.
Yeah, tens of thousands.
Let it be, may it be.
And this feeling people have, we don't need expats to work among these people. This is not correct, is it?
That we need expats?
We need expats, according to me and according to you. People think that only local people can do the whole thing. Like in India, we are so biased against Muslims, against Pakistan. It's very difficult to love Muslims in India for an average.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
And I think
so
Christians in Egypt have difficulty in loving Muslims. So they can't really disciple them. If you don't love
you're
them,
right. But in God's eyes, there's no such thing as expats. There's just his servants.
yeah.
And I learned this from George Brewer. A broken, before God, humble servant is not despised wherever he or she comes from. If you want to lord it over people, then you're going to have a difficult time. But a real servant is appreciated no matter where you were born.
Yeah.
That's what we try to inculcate in the Lord's servants, that you've gone there to serve, not lord it over or just tell everybody what to do, but somehow motivate them. Because we went out with them, we were one with our India teams. They were greatly motivated. And that's part of the reason why OM India grew so large. And so I think servanthood is still what we're all called to. One of my friends, Gordon Magney, who's now with the Lord, who ended up in Afghanistan doing a very significant work. He was out with his Indian brothers distributing literature, and one of them said, "You know, normally the missionaries give us shoes, but we have to buy you shoes." But that really knit our hearts. They weren't working for us.
Yeah.
They were truly working for the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah, Greg, you don't believe in lone rangers. You believe in teamwork, people with different giftings making their contribution.
Ephesians 4:11 and 12 is where I stand. God gave to the church first apostles, which I think is what pioneer missionaries really are. People who say, we need to do this, we need to do it whatever it costs. And those people need a team because they can't do everything. Only a few of that team members really have the gift of an evangelist. We all try to do evangelists, but we know people who just are right in there to pray with as many people as they can.
Yeah.
And if they come back to your team and say, I've led 7 Muslims to the Lord, you try not to roll your eyes, but maybe one of those Muslims actually did meet the Lord. And so you need those with pastoral gifting who will come alongside and spend 100 hours with that new Muslim believer so they can stand on their feet. And then you need pastors in the sense of who's going to keep that little fellowship from splitting 3 ways, keep them loving one another and so forth. That's my understanding of a pastor who can deal with people's anger and problems. And my uncle is more important than your uncle. Then we need people who can keep us in the country with a project in many places on that team who may not get into evangelism and all of it, but they're part of it. Yes, I very much believe in teams, but teams that will stick it out for years until they have totally worked themselves out of a job, because there's a string of house churches that are reproducing.
Greg, how much contextualization methodology is the first problem. Some people say you can use the Quran. Some people say you cannot use the Quran. You have to have Muslim-friendly Bible. You can't use the word Allah, or you can use the word Allah. All kinds of these conflict situations that Christians create among themselves, which is not very helpful for the ministry.
Yeah, that's why we say try it your way. For the Americans, we early frontiers, we called ourselves the Burger King mission. Try it your way. And who knows what God will use. And why we use up our energy trying to discourage somebody else's efforts. Who knows what God's going to use. And I think we've spent far too much time deciding whose method is right or criticizing somebody's method that sounds far too simplistic. I just demonstrated through early OM how simplistic can be very fruitful. I just want to encourage everybody. And then people are going to learn from what they do, say that didn't work very well. Let's try something else. It's not helpful to exaggerate claims. And it's not helpful to pass on stories that don't have confirmation, because this gives people a false idea of how much harvest is really there. Becky Lewis has been such a help to me to realize what people don't have anyone even living in their midst who is making an effort to explain who Jesus really is. And so let's be iron sharpening iron, which is a positive approach to questioning methodologies as opposed to having to deflate or be negative about somebody's. I just told you about early OM in India. Nobody would say that what we did was the best methodology, but being available and learning as you go. I'm still praying for India to have some teams that are focused totally on the Muslim peoples of India, which is not the favorite kind of ministry for people to adapt because they haven't had a lot of examples of fruitful ministry among the Muslims. But do we all realize that very soon India will pass Indonesia as a country with the most Muslims of any country in the world?
That's right.
They're still a minority group in India.
That's right.
But they're going to have more Muslims than Indonesia.
Yeah, that's right. Greg, persecution is a major issue with working among Muslims. That's one of the reasons why people don't want to get into it.
Read your New Testament and the promises of Jesus that you will go to prison, you will be killed. That guy that tried to get into the islands, went to the islands it's illegal to go to, and was killed. He was very criticized. I didn't know him, but I'm sure Jesus welcomed him when he came into the Father's house for giving it a try. And pioneer stuff. We think the 5 guys that were killed going to the Alca Indians are heroes, and they are. History shows us that there has to be a lot of suffering, even death, before there are breakthroughs among many people. Am I not right?
Jesus didn't say go to the safe place.
Who said go and make disciples of all nations if it's safe?
I'm sending you as lambs.
Lambs of the slaughter. And when people realize that somebody's gone and laid down their life, that's what's inspired many others to get involved in pioneer ministry. We need examples.
And what are the ingredients required to work among the Muslims? What special training or requirements that you think makes people be able to work among Muslims effectively?
A commitment to keep learning your whole life, not to think, oh, I just got the right formula now, that's going to work, and that I don't need to understand anymore. I'm still learning. I'm still listening. I'm still examining. I'm sure all of you are too. But to think that there's one way, that there's one technique that's going to work among all peoples is a little immature, really. You've got to get God's mind for God's assignment for that time. And it may be that the pioneers don't get it, but their faithful man or woman gets it. Opens the door in a way that we never could. But they wouldn't have done that if we hadn't been standing right by them and supporting them. Like the boxer's manager. You probably don't like boxing, but you know that the boxer has a guy in his corner that when they ring the bell, he wipes the sweat and blood off the guy's face. And the guy says, I'm getting killed. Let me out of here. And he wipes off his face and says, I think the other guy's weakening. Keep going. And we need to all be encouraging people to pay the price. And why? Because we like to see them suffer? No, but because they'll be glad for eternity that they did.
Yeah.
You don't go in there as the enemy of Islam. Why would you be against people who've been deceived, who didn't ask to be deceived, didn't ask to have a tradition that they can't talk to God as Father, that they can only recite 7th century Arabic phrases over and over again? And loving Muslims is like loving anybody else. You've got to enter into their world with empathy and then learn from those that are being the most fruitful and being in the learner stance for your whole life. Also learning what's unnecessary persecution. If you say, I'm exaggerating, but Muhammad went to hell and so are you. That's probably not going to get you very far. You are going to have opposition. You are going to lose your visa, maybe for some places. Very early on, I came to understand that we're in a vicious war against principalities and powers. The Muslims aren't the enemy. The principalities and powers are the enemy who want to keep the Muslims in darkness. But another challenge is when you have a rough time is to quit or to go off to a non-Muslim people. And that's why we said in Frontiers, if you talk to anybody that's not a Muslim, we cut your hands off.
Yeah.
It's because in history, too much people have given up and said, I'll go help the French soldiers. They're lost too in Algeria. But I think persecution is part of the whole story. We can't avoid it totally, but we can at least become likable people, servants, who maybe the Muslims will stand up for you against other Muslims because you've got those kind of relationships.
Yeah. This is your time, Greg. You want to share from the Great Commission and Islam and how you navigate the Great Commission through Islam. You got your 10 minutes to give fatherly advice to all the people who are listening and how to get involved in Muslim ministry.
Don't give up. That's the main thing. Making disciples among Muslims is God's idea. It's not our idea. It's not the idea of any particular group. You just remind yourself of the basics. Jesus died for these Muslims, and we may have to die in various ways as well. And the great challenge is to see the new generation willing to lay down their lives for Muslims, whatever it costs, of whatever nationality, or not much is happening. People easily say, go where the Lord's working, but you got to go where the Lord isn't evidently yet working because there hasn't been enough seed and there hasn't been enough examples. If I'm a Muslim and you challenge me to follow Christ, I want to meet someone like myself who's doing it and who's taking the punishment. And the scary thing, too often in history, when a Muslim would come to the Lord and get in trouble, the missionary would ship him off to a Bible school somewhere. He'd marry a Swedish girl and go to Sweden, and that was the end of it. And so, like I said, we're more like the boxer's manager. We got to wipe the blood off and send them back in, but be willing to suffer ourselves, whatever it takes. And that's not a talk that is cheerful. It's just New Testament reality that it's going to cost a lot of people a very heavy price to see the breakthrough among Muslim peoples where it hasn't happened much, like in North India. So we know these things, and it is important to think about in teams and pooling our gifts. And that means internationally as well as locally. For the Muslims of India, I'd say it's their turn until the Lord gives you these unstoppable persons that you can stand behind, apostle-like persons with the grit of the Apostle Paul. Maybe not very much is going to happen.